All right, let's jump right in. Today we're talking about one of the most complicated, fascinating, and honestly tragic figures in American presidential history, Richard Nixon. He was, in every sense, a president of contradictions.
And really, these two images tell you everything you need to know. On one side, you have this masterful statesman, shaking hands with the leader of the Soviet Union, literally easing the tensions of the Cold War. And on the other, you have a man being torn apart by scandal, the architect of his own ruin.
So it all boils down to this one big question, right? It's the question that's going to guide us through this whole story. How could a president who accomplished so much, who reached such incredible heights, end up falling into absolute disgrace?
To even begin to understand the fall, you first have to get a handle on just how monumental his rise was. So let's start there. Let's look at Nixon's vision for a new America and how he really did reshape the country's direction. Okay, so his biggest, most dramatic impact was probably on foreign policy. For decades, the U.S. strategy against communism had been something called containment, basically an aggressive head-to-head fight. Well, Nixon came in and completely flipped the script. He introduced a brand new idea, détente. And this definition here says it all. It's about relaxing strained relations, and how do you do that? Through talking, through communication. Instead of just endless confrontation, his whole idea was, let's open a dialogue with our biggest adversaries.
And wow, did it work. I mean, look at this list of wins. He didn't just talk about it, he actually changed American foreign policy. He got the U.S. out of the Vietnam War. He famously opened up China to the West after decades of total isolation. And of course, he achieved that historic détente with the Soviet Union. I mean, that's an absolutely incredible record.
But here's the thing, his strategic mind wasn't only focused overseas. Back in the U.S., he saw a nation that was just churning with cultural and political change. And in all that chaos, he spotted a massive opportunity to completely realign American politics.
And this is how he did it. It became known as the Southern Strategy. Now, the idea was to peel away Southern white voters, a lot of whom had been Democrats for generations, and bring them over to the Republican Party. How? By appealing to their frustrations over things like the civil rights movement and the growing power of the federal government.
And if you look at this map, you can see exactly why this strategy was so genius, politically speaking. Look at the population growth in the South during this time. It was booming. Nixon was tapping directly into the mindset of this huge, growing, and increasingly powerful part of the country. Now, this strategy was all part of a much bigger conservative shift he was pushing for. He argued for a smaller, more limited national government. So, he went after many of the big, great society social programs. He pushed to give states more control over things like welfare, and he put the brakes on new federal civil rights policies. But, and this is a huge but, for all of these massive historic successes, there was this destructive, dark force at work inside the man himself. And this is where we enter the shadow of his paranoia. This cartoon just says it all, doesn't it? His own worst enemy. Despite all his political brilliance, Nixon was just deeply, deeply insecure. He was paranoid about power and was absolutely convinced that there were enemies hiding everywhere, constantly trying to take him down. And this paranoia, it wasn't just a feeling he had. It became his game plan. He literally kept an enemies list of anyone he thought was against him, political rivals, journalists, you name it. And then he used the power of the presidency to spy on them, to infiltrate their groups, to sabotage them. And it's these very tactics, born out of this deep-seated fear, that led him straight to his own downfall. So you have to ask yourself, what happens when the most powerful person on the planet starts seeing enemies around every single corner?
Well, the answer is the Watergate scandal. The complete, and I mean total unraveling of a presidency.
Okay, so let's quickly walk through how this thing just spiraled out of control. It starts with this kind of clumsy break-in at the Democratic Party headquarters. But here's the key. The crime wasn't the break-in. The crime was the cover-up. The White House tried to hide its involvement. But investigators kept digging, and they uncovered this whole web of illegal activity. And then came the bombshell, the discovery of a secret taping system in the Oval Office. Those tapes had the proof. Nixon, of course, refused to hand them over, which created a huge constitutional crisis. And in the end, facing certain impeachment, he did the unthinkable. He resigned, the first and only U.S. president ever to do so.
At the very height of the scandal, Nixon gets on TV and delivers one of the most famous lines in all of political history.
But the tragic irony is that his own secret tapes would prove him wrong. I mean, this cartoon captures it perfectly. He's literally being stretched between his public denial, "I am," and the damning proof on those tapes that showed he was, in fact, a crook.
But in the end, the American system of government actually worked. This image of the broken crown is just so powerful. The message is clear. The man who acted like a king is gone. But the office, the institution of the presidency itself, survives.
So Nixon was gone, but the damage was done, and his actions would leave this permanent scar on the country, creating a legacy of distrust that we're still dealing with today.
Yeah, the effects were just massive. Watergate completely shattered the public's trust in its leaders. It just piled on top of all the distrust already created by the Vietnam War. On the flip side, it showed everyone just how important a free press is, acting as a watchdog on power. And it also pushed Congress to step up and take on a stronger leadership role.
So in the years right after Nixon left, America was in a tough spot. The country felt overextended. People deeply distrusted the government, the economy was in a recession, and our standing in the world seemed to be slipping. It was just a really uncertain time for the nation.
And that kind of brings us to our final thought. I mean, Richard Nixon resigned decades ago, but those seeds of cynicism and distrust that he planted, they've had a very long and complicated life. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Did that distrust from Watergate ever really go away?